Ultimate General Civil War isn't just another historical strategy game, which is somewhat a dime a dozen in the strategy genre. To me, it's one of the most overlooked gems in the entire strategy hemisphere. While games like Total War, Hearts of Iron 4, or other Paradox games tend to dominate the strategy spotlight, I think Ultimate General quietly offers one of the more authentic and replayable Civil War experiences out there. Not that there is a lot of Civil War experiences for you to experience, but I think after spending more than 700 hours on this game, I can say it deserves a lot more recognition than it gets. So today, I wanted to dive into what makes Ultimate General Civil War so special, where it stumbles, and why, even all these years later, it's definitely still worth playing. So this game, rather obviously, takes place during the American Civil War, and covers almost all the major battles of the war, and even some alt history battles depending on what campaign you're playing. Now, if you're not American, or you're somehow unfamiliar with the American Civil War, it was a battle between the northern and southern states over, well, that's still debated. I like to use the line, the war was over secession, secession was over slavery. The South wanted to secede from the Union, the northern states, and become its own country. They felt that they were constitutionally guaranteed that right. The North disagreed, and conflict ensued. That's all I'll say on the topic. But in this game, you do not play as any historical army or leader, nor do you fight battles on every front of the war. You actually get to create your own general and choose your own backstory, which allows you to roleplay, and you can actually play as yourself if you want. That's one of the things I think is sorely lacking in other strategy games. For me, a big part of gaming is the ability to roleplay, to immerse yourself in another world, another time. And in most other strategy games, where you lead armies or nations, there aren't usually options to actually play as yourself, to actually decide your backstory, what profession you were before the war started or before you became president. In other strategy games, you usually played as the so-called spirit of the nation, like the Europa series or Hearts of Iron 4, where you are the nation manifested. You aren't the president or a general or anyone else that lives in the nation that you play as. You are the nation's soul and guide. This game has you play as a West Point graduate who served in the Mexican-American War, who then chose to either stay in the army, or start a business, or go into politics, and all of your background choices leading up to the war affect your starting stats. You have a couple of stats. One of your first stats is politics, which affects the amount of rewards you get after battle. So how much money you get, how many recruits you're able to pull from. So I really do recommend dumping all of your skill points into politics as soon as possible. The next skill is economy, which makes purchasing equipment for your soldiers cheaper the more you level it up. The next skill is medicine, which depending on your skill level gives you a percentage of your casualties back as volunteers after every battle. The next skill is training, and in this game, the training skill doesn't do what it does in every other game. It just allows you to purchase veteran troops cheaper, since when you replenish your army after a battle, you lose so many men. You can either replenish your troops with free recruits, which don't cost you any money, but they do bring down the total experience pool of that unit, so it makes them less efficient. Or you can pay more money and purchase veteran troops who don't bring down the total experience pool of that unit, which I'll go into a bit more detail later. The next skill is organization, which allows you to field a bigger army, have more troops in a unit at a time, have more division, have more corps. But it is a double-edged sword, because when you level it up, the enemy army gets more troops as well, which isn't exactly historical, it's really more of a balancing mechanic. Next skill is logistics, which determines the amount of ammo your troops start with, which was obviously very important historically. You could honestly say that about almost any conflict in history. But in-game, your troops can keep on firing even without ammo, but it just slows down the firing rate. I am not the biggest fan of this feature at all, because in the real Civil War, ammo on both sides was such a big deal. If you look at Gettysburg, go ahead and watch the movie, read some books, and you look at them fighting at Little Round Top, when the Union troops were exhausted and out of ammo, and they had to hold the line. Otherwise, the Confederacy would be able to roll up across the whole army by taking out one side of the flank. The only thing the Union troops could do was charge at the enemy, and they pushed them off the hill. That can't happen in this game, or it can, But that is never the optimal or best choice because your troops don't run out of ammo. They can just stay sitting there forever and keep on firing, even if it's at a lower rate, which is still usually a better idea than charging a numerically superior opponent. Or even in the Overland campaign, where Grant and Lee first faced off in 1864, ammo was at an all-time low for the Confederates. Meanwhile, Union production and industry allowed them to keep their troops well supplied. Logistics is a major part of any general's repertoire, but with this game, it allows you not to prepare as much with your supplies, and it lets you not have to make the hard tactical decisions that real generals had to make. The last skill is reconnaissance, which allows you to see before the battle starts how many troops your enemy has, and as the battle goes on, you can see how many men the enemy has lost and how many men they have left. The game has, I think, a pretty cool and unique way to tie the gameplay into a bigger story or campaign. So after the first prologue battle, you're then dropped into the campaign screen, which is most of the Eastern theater of the Civil War, where you don't just speed through all the major battles of the Eastern Front. There are around 48 smaller skirmishes or engagements you can choose to fight, which if you win, allows you to get more money, more troops, more reputation points, and it also gives debuffs to the enemy army in the next major engagement. So typically, you'll play a battle, and then you'll move on to the next campaign, I guess I'll call it. And there'll usually be a major battle, and then 3 smaller skirmishes you can engage with. If you win all of those skirmishes, it makes it a lot easier to win that next major battle. But it is a bit of a double-edged sword. If you lose those battles, you lose men, you lose reputation points, and in this game, if you lose enough battles, you will be forced to resign. Or you might just have to restart the campaign because you don't have enough supplies, men, or money to actually win battles anymore. A couple of lost battles or hard wins can really ruin a campaign. While you're also looking at the campaign screen, this is also where you're going to manage your army. And depending on your organizational skills, you can field more men per unit and have more division and corps. When you want a new unit, you decide what type of unit it is going to be. There's infantry, cavalry, artillery, and skirmishers, and they all serve a pretty unique purpose, but unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty or really trying to min-max, infantry and artillery are typically going to make up the bulk of your army. And after choosing what type of unit to make them, you're going to choose what weapons to arm them with. The better weapons cost more money, but they have more range, they're deadlier. But of course, there may not even be enough weapons in storage for you to buy and equip all of your men with them. So as the campaign drags on, your men are all going to be using different weapons. You might lose too many men to re-equip them with the best weapons, so you might either have to make the unit smaller or just switch out the weapons. And all of the weapons were real. They're all real-world weapons, which they really used, which I really think helps immersion and just sort of also teaches you a few things while you play. And it also allows you to equip your units for different things. So for cavalry, you can decide whether you want them to be equipped with a carbine and then have poor melee capabilities, and have them be more like dragoons, which are essentially mobile infantry, or you can equip them with pistols, shotguns, and swords, and have them excel at running around the map and destroying lone units, or artillery and melee, but then they're not very good at shooting. I think that actually getting to decide what the composition of your army is just really immersive and helps you with the role-playing. Battle tactics in this game are also interesting because, well, it takes place during the Civil War. The war is considered by some to be the turning point in history, where the more Napoleonic Revolutionary War style of just lining up from across each other and shooting started to fade, and now it's more about outmaneuvering your opponent, getting good high ground, flanking enemies, using cover, which, don't get me wrong, these have always been a thing in war, to a lesser extent. I mean, Napoleon was famous for his foot cavalry approach, where his rapid movements and fast marching allowed him to end wars before they even really started. But with the new destructive weapons being made, allowing faster fire rates for small arms and artillery alike, and then increased range and accuracy for weapons, it changed what battlefield tactics were viable in war. Before the Civil War, lines of infantry were much tighter and closer to the enemy to compensate for the low accuracy and lethality of the firearms. So there's a reason they, lined up from across each other and shot at each other really close to each other. It's because their weapons were very inaccurate. It was very hard to hit, so it made more sense to fire in a mass volley to increase the chances of being able to hit, and then it will also demoralize your opponent. In the Civil War, if you fought like that in just a standard line formation like the Redcoats from the Revolutionary War or the French Army of Napoleon, they would have been slaughtered with much higher death rates. Modes of communication also changed. The telegraph and railroad allowed men and orders to move quickly. Now you don't have to wait for a messenger on a horse to come and give you orders. Of course, they still did that, but for higher ranked generals and even politicians, they could get a much clearer and quicker big picture of what the battle and campaign looks like. It was also the war that had some of the very first use cases of trenches and dug-in defenses on a whole new scale. If you look at certain campaigns and sieges, and you look at pictures, it actually more closely resembles a World War I battlefield that you would imagine than what you would think a Civil War battlefield would look like, and this game represents that clearly. If you have more men, you can still use standard line tactics, but prepare to bleed for it. And they also have a pretty unique cover system in this game, which I think simulates what cover, looks like in battlefields pretty well. They give you a cover percentage based on what type of ground your troops are in. So if they're deployed in a forested area, their cover percentage is going to go up to sort of simulate that they're behind trees, and then if they're in an open field, it goes down a lot, down to 0, and it makes a world of difference. Supplies in this game are also given by a wagon unit, which gives out ammo to all nearby units in a circle radius until it's gone. But if you have fast cavalry, or make the whole enemy line rout, you can capture their supply wagon and use their supplies for yourself. This game also has a pretty cool reputation mechanic, where if you win battle, you get more reputation, which you can then spend on more supplies like manpower, new guns, new generals, or you can choose to save it, and the higher your reputation is, the more morale your men start with. I think it's a pretty cool abstraction of public opinion at the time, because that's somewhat how armies worked, especially back then. The more popular you were with the civilian front, the more support your government and men would give you, especially in regards to the Civil War in the South. Lee and his generals were the heroes of the South. They were the new Continental Army in the Confederacy's eyes. They received the most support and aid because his victories kept the Confederacy alive and made the Union fearful. It works the same way in game. Win more battles and you receive more support from your government. I also think this game makes you really think like a Civil War general. You have to use tactics that they were actually using. If you're attacking, you want to use skirmishers to distract the enemy while you flank around. You want your cavalry to cause havoc in their backfield and disrupt supply lines. And after hammering the enemy with volleys, you want to charge to rout them from the battlefield, or at least get them out of their hard stuck defensive position. I also think this game allows you to give orders really easily. If you've been watching the gameplay at all, I think you'll just sort of understand what it is. But if I lift click and drag over some units, I can then right click and drag a line, and the men will just deploy in that line. I can have that line be any way I want. I can have it edge out so certain units are ahead of each other. It makes it really easy to just set up mass amounts of men. And then you can also have the men, you can draw a line and they will take that way. So if you want some men to take the long way around an enemy position and have them flank around, they'll do that. You don't have to click 5 times and babysit them to make sure that they're going the right way. And then I think this game also pretty realistically simulates weapons with a certain amount of depth and realism. If you're just using, shitty pre-war muskets, you're going to have a hard time against men using Springfields and other more advanced weapons. The AI in this game is also pretty decent. I know a lot of people complain about it because, of course, it is a game. You can cheese them. There's a lot you can do. But it's a lot better than the AI in Total War. If your men encounter an enemy, they'll turn to face it and start fighting back instead of just getting destroyed, getting shot in the back and just waiting for orders. They do have some initiative, some independence. I also love how all the maps in this game of major engagements are pretty historically accurate. I mean, if you play the Gettysburg map, it looks like a 1-to-1 recreation. I think this game could be a great introduction to somebody who hasn't had an interest in the Civil War, but sort of wants to learn a little bit more about it. I put around 700 hours into this game, as I mentioned. I think it's pretty replayable. I think I might have maxed out how replayable it is with these 700 hours, but that's a lot of hours. There's a Union and Confederate campaign to play through. You can change the composition of your army. You can also choose to play historical battles with the actual men and division at those battles. I think the graphics are pretty good. I mean, it's a top-down perspective. You're not going to see some soldier's teeth or anything. There's not a lot of detail. But there's enough detail, and the body of dead men will litter the ground. So after praising the game so much, I will point out some criticisms I have. I think the biggest one I have is that victory is not decided by casualties or who's winning the tide of battle, but capturing predetermined victory points. So there might be a point on the map that you have to capture. You have to capture that point to win. So whether you're attacking or defending it, you have to hold on. I understand that it would be pretty hard to program organic victory points, which may pop up where the heat of battle is. But there's been some battles where I've just dominated the enemy, but I lose on a technicality because I didn't capture the victory point in time. So the game considers it a loss, even though I completely routed, destroyed the army. If I don't capture that victory point in time, the game just considers it a wash. I also wish the creators would have done a bit more, maybe come up with like a random scenario map mode, or even if they just released a map maker, because if you play the game enough, the maps get boring, you know what's coming, you know what to expect. Once you've seen all the maps, you've just seen all of them, there's no more. I wish the creators would have enabled the Steam Workshop, been a bit more friendly to the modding community, but unfortunately the studio actually will not be making any new games. They were bought by a new company, and I believe they only make mobile games now, something akin to that. They also released a quasi-sequel to this called Ultimate General American Revolutions, which I also have a review on. You should go check it out. But unfortunately, this game will get no more support, and none of their titles ever will. I really do hope they come back, but as it stands right now, that's just not going to happen. But I don't know, I really think this game is one of the more underrated strategy games. I really don't see a lot of people talk about it online, in person, anybody I talk to that never really heard of it. I think it's a lot better than like Total War or Command and Conquer type games, and I think it should be held up by the strategy community of what a great game can be. I don't think it gets enough praise. I think this game does a great job of turning just a series of battles into a journey through one of the most pivotal periods in American history, because you take your army at the start, and you can have those same generals, same lieutenants, all the way to the end of the war. Or maybe mass casualties happen, your army grows and retracts, and you really have an experience with them. And as I mentioned, it does have its shortcomings. It's not the perfect game, but I think it has incredible strengths. I think the detailed battle tactics, the authentic recreation of historical battlefields, and the way it sort of challenges you to think like a general of the Civil War era makes it well worth buying. I think it really can be used as a doorway into history. You know, you're not really just witnessing history, but you're participating in it when you play this game. So that's really all I have to say. You know, if you like the video, please like, subscribe, all that stuff, and maybe check out my Twitter, you know, in the bio. Feel free to drop me a follow. That's all I have. Please remember that Jesus loves you.